I overheard my in-laws planning to take my kids. Their reasoning made me run. I overheard my in-laws planning to take my children from me, not through a custody battle after a divorce, not through any legal means I had agreed to. They were planning to call CPS with fabricated reports, to build a case that I was an unfit mother, to take my kids while I was powerless to stop them. And my husband, the father of my children, was helping them do it. I grabbed my kids and ran, and I've been looking over my shoulder ever since. I'm 29 years old with two daughters, Emma, who's 5, and Lily, who's 3. I've been married to my husband Jason for 7 years. We met when I was working as a server at a restaurant during college. He was a few years older, already established in his family's real estate business, charming and attentive. I came from a working class background, parents who worked hard their whole lives but never had much. Jason's family had money. Not rich exactly, but comfortable in a way mine had never been. His mother, Patricia, made it clear from the beginning that she didn't think I was good enough for her son. She was always polite to my face, but there were comments about my clothes not being quite right, about my table manners needing work, about my family's quaint little house when they came to visit. Jason would tell me not to worry about it, that his mother was particular about everything, that it wasn't personal. I should have paid more attention to those early warning signs, but I was young and in love and believed that Jason choosing me meant his family would eventually accept me. We got married despite Patricia's obvious disappointment, had our first daughter Emma 2 years later, then Lily 2 years after that. Jason's parents, Patricia and Richard, lived about 45 minutes away in a wealthy suburb. Large house, manicured lawn, country club membership, the whole package. Richard had made his money in commercial real estate and had brought Jason into the business. Patricia didn't work, spent her time on charity boards and social committees and maintaining appearances. They saw the girls regularly, but always with comments. Patricia would remark on what the girls were wearing, suggesting I should dress them better, would comment on their behavior, implying I wasn't disciplining them properly, would mention things like private schools and proper upbringing in ways that made it clear she thought I was failing as a mother. Jason usually defended me when these comments happened in front of me. He'd tell his mother to back off, that I was doing a great job with the girls. But lately, things had been different. He'd been distant, distracted. We'd been arguing more, mostly about money and parenting decisions. He thought I was too lenient with the girls. I thought he was too focused on appearances and what his parents thought. 3 weeks ago, Jason suggested we spend a weekend at his parents' house. His mother had been asking to see more of the girls, he said. It would give us a break from our routine. I didn't particularly want to go, but Jason pressed, saying it would mean a lot to his parents. I agreed, not realizing I was walking into a trap. We arrived Friday evening. Patricia had the guest room set up for us and had prepared the girls' old nursery as a bedroom for Emma and Lily. Everything was perfect, as always, decorated and coordinated in a way my own home never was. Patricia made comments about how nice it must be for the girls to have a proper bedroom with matching furniture. I bit my tongue. Dinner was tense. Richard asked about my job as an administrative assistant at a medical office. His tone made it clear he thought it was beneath their family. Patricia mentioned several times how exhausting it must be for me to work full-time and care for children, implying I wasn't managing either well. Jason didn't defend me the way he usually did. He just ate his dinner and changed the subject. After dinner, the girls were tired and cranky from the long drive. Lily had a meltdown about something small, the way 3-year-olds do. She'd wanted a specific stuffed animal that was at home and wouldn't be consoled. I tried to calm her, but she cried for a good 15 minutes before exhausting herself. I saw Patricia watching with this expression on her face, lips pursed, disapproving. Later that evening, after I'd gotten both girls to sleep, I realized I'd left my phone charger in the car. I headed downstairs to get it. The house was large and old, with rooms that had doors that didn't quite close all the way. As I approached the living room, I heard voices, Jason, Patricia, and Richard, talking in tones they probably thought were quiet enough not to carry. I stopped in the hallway, something in Patricia's voice making me pause. She was saying my name. Emma needs stability, Patricia was saying. Both girls do. They need structure and routine and proper care. not this chaos. I know, Mother, Jason replied. I've been documenting everything, like you said. My blood went cold. Documenting everything? The videos will help, Richard's voice now. Shows the house in disarray, the children upset, her drinking. Drinking? I had wine with dinner occasionally, maybe a glass or two on weekends. That's what they were calling drinking? And we have the lawyer ready? Patricia asked. Yes, Richard said. Margaret has handled these cases before. She says with the documentation Jason's been gathering, plus our financial resources and stability, we have a strong case for custody. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they'd hear it. They were talking about taking my children, taking Emma and Lily from me. The CPS reports need to be filed strategically, Patricia continued. Her voice was calm, businesslike, like she was planning a charity event instead of destroying my life. Margaret says multiple reports from different sources carry more weight. Jason, you'll make the first call, expressing concern as the father. Then Richard and I will call separately after witnessing concerning behavior during this visit. What behavior? Jason asked. She's been fine this weekend. Lily's meltdown tonight, that can be framed as the child being distressed due to inadequate care. The fact that she couldn't calm her own daughter. We'll mention exhaustion, overwhelm, inability to cope. The house being messy is good evidence too, Richard added, shows lack of structure and hygiene. My house was lived in, yes. Toys on the floor, dishes in the sink sometimes, the normal state of a home with 2 small children and 2 working parents. It wasn't a health hazard, it was just real life. I've been taking photos, Jason said. The mess, the times she's let them watch too much TV because she's tired, the nights she's fed them chicken nuggets instead of proper meals. I've got videos of her losing her patience, of her having that second glass of wine while the girls were still awake. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My husband had been gathering evidence against me, documenting normal moments of parenting and framing them as neglect, taking photos of our home in its everyday state and presenting it as squalor, recording me having completely normal, human moments of frustration and fatigue and spinning them into a narrative of an unfit mother. Once CPS investigates and finds the conditions concerning, we move forward with the custody filing, Patricia said. Margaret will argue that the children would be better off in our care, with Jason having primary custody here with us. We have the space, the resources, the time to devote to raising them properly. What about her? Jason asked quietly. Won't she fight this? Of course she'll fight, Richard said, but she doesn't have our resources. She can't afford the kind of legal representation we can, and with the CPS reports, the documentation, our standing in the community, it's hard for her to win. Margaret says most judges look very favorably on grandparents who can provide superior care. And the inheritance? Jason asked. There was a pause. Then Patricia. Once the girls are with us permanently, we'll adjust the trust as we discussed. You'll be well taken care of. You're doing the right thing, Jason. Those girls deserve better than growing up in that tiny house with a mother who can barely manage. They deserve the opportunities we can give them. Private schools, proper socialization, the right connections. They're Hendersons. They should be raised like Hendersons. I stood in that hallway, trying not to make a sound, trying not to vomit, trying not to scream. They were planning to take my children, not because I was actually harming them, not because they were in any danger, but because Patricia thought I wasn't good enough, because I was working class and didn't have the right clothes or the right house or the right background, because my children were being raised in a normal middle-class home instead of the upper-class world Patricia thought they deserved. And Jason was betraying me for money, for his inheritance. He was willing to take his own children from his mother, to traumatize them, to tear our family apart, for money, and his parents' approval. When do we start? Jason asked. We'll observe this weekend, Patricia said. Document anything we can use. Then, Jason, you'll make the first CPS call on Tuesday after you're back home. Express concern about your wife's ability to cope, about the conditions in the home, about the children's welfare. Make it sound reluctant, like you're agonizing over it but feel you have no choice. Then Richard and I will call on Wednesday, corroborating and adding our observations from this visit. What if CPS doesn't find enough to remove them? Jason asked. They probably won't. Not immediately, Richard said. These things take time, but it establishes a record, an investigation on file. Then, when we file for custody, it's additional evidence. We're building a case, not expecting one call to solve everything. And we're sure this will work? Jason sounded uncertain now, maybe getting cold feet. Margaret has handled cases like this before, Patricia said firmly. Grandparents successfully getting custody when they can prove superior resources and environment. With your support as the father, with the documentation, with CPS involvement, we have an excellent chance. Those girls will be raised properly, Jason, as they should be, as Hendersons. I didn't wait to hear more. I moved as quietly as I could back toward the stairs, my mind racing. I needed my phone. I needed to record this. I needed evidence of what they were planning. I crept back upstairs to the guest room where Jason and I were staying, found my phone, and opened the voice recording app. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. Then I went back downstairs, being as silent as possible. They were still talking in the living room. I held my phone up near the doorway, praying it would pick up their voices clearly. Stayed there for 10 minutes that felt like hours, recording everything. Patricia going over the timeline again, Richard discussing their lawyer's strategy, Jason confirming what evidence he'd gathered, talking about the photos on his phone, the videos he'd taken over the past months. She has no idea, Patricia asked at one point. None, Jason said. I've been preoccupied with work. She doesn't know I've been meeting with your lawyer, that I've been building this case. She trusts me. The way he said that last part, with something almost like regret, made me hate him more than I thought possible. I recorded for as long as I dared, then crept back upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room, shaking, listening to the recording to make sure it was clear. It was. Every word. Their entire conspiracy laid out in Patricia's matter-of-fact voice, Richard's strategic planning, and Jason's betrayal. I looked at the time, almost 10 p.m. The girls were asleep down the hall. My husband and his parents were downstairs, plotting to take my children from me. I had a recording of their plan, but no idea what to do with it. I couldn't stay here. That was the first clear thought. I couldn't spend the night in this house, couldn't pretend everything was fine, couldn't look at Jason without him seeing the knowledge in my eyes. And I couldn't risk them somehow preventing me from leaving with the girls once they realized I knew. I had to run. Now, tonight, before they could stop me. I moved quickly and quietly, packed up our things, the girls' clothes and toys, stuffing everything into our bags. Went to the nursery where Emma and Lily were sleeping. Woke Emma first, whispering that we were going on an adventure, that she needed to be very quiet. She was confused, but complied, used to trusting me. I picked up Lily, who barely stirred, and carried her. Emma held my hand. We crept down the back stairs, the ones that led to the mudroom and garage. My car was parked in the driveway. I got both girls strapped into their car seats, still half asleep and confused. Put our bags in the trunk. Then I got in the driver's seat and started the car. I was halfway down the driveway when I saw lights come on in the house. Someone had heard us. I pressed the gas, pulling out onto the street faster than was safe. In my rearview mirror, I saw the front door open, Jason running out, but I was already gone. I drove for 20 minutes, just putting distance between us and that house, before I pulled over in a grocery store parking lot and tried to think clearly. Emma was asking questions from the back seat. Why did we leave? Where were we going? Where was Daddy? I told her we needed to go home, that everything was okay, that I'd explain later. She wasn't satisfied, but she was tired enough to accept it. I couldn't go home. If I went to our house, Jason would follow me there. He had a key. He could take the girls. I needed somewhere safe, somewhere he couldn't reach us. I called my friend Rachel. It was almost 11 at night, but she answered, groggy and confused. I told her I needed a place to stay immediately, that I couldn't explain on the phone, but it was an emergency. Rachel had been my friend since college, one of the few people in my life who knew me before Jason, who'd never been impressed by his family's money. She said to come over immediately, gave me her address again even though I'd been there many times. I drove to Rachel's apartment on the other side of town. She met me at the door, took one look at my face, and helped me get the girls inside without asking questions. She set them up in her guest room, both of them falling back asleep almost immediately despite the strange surroundings. Then, I sat at Rachel's kitchen table and told her everything. What I'd overheard, what Jason had been doing, what they were planning. I played her the recording, watching her face cycle through shock and horror and rage. "You need a lawyer," Rachel said immediately. "First thing tomorrow morning, you need to file for emergency custody and get ahead of whatever they're planning. It's Saturday tomorrow. Then you call a lawyer's emergency line. You call the police. You do whatever you need to do to protect those girls. Because if they file those CPS reports and you're not prepared, if they get ahead of you on this, it's going to be so much harder to fight." She was right. I couldn't just hide at Rachel's apartment and hope this went away. I needed to take action, needed to protect my daughters legally before Jason and his parents could execute their plan. I spent the rest of that night on my phone, found a family law attorney who had an emergency line, left a detailed message explaining the situation, sent the recording file. The attorney, a woman named Susan Carter, called me back at 7 in the morning. She listened to the recording. She told me to come to her office immediately, that she'd meet me there even though it was Saturday. Rachel stayed with the girls while I met with Susan. I brought my laptop with the recording file backed up, my phone with everything documented. Susan listened to the entire recording again, taking notes. Her expression grew more serious as it went on. "This is conspiracy to commit fraud," Susan said when it finished. "They're planning to file false CPS reports, to manufacture evidence, to abuse the legal system to take your children. The recording is clear evidence of their intent." "What do I do?" I asked. "They're planning to call CPS on Tuesday. I have 3 days." "We file an emergency motion for custody today," Susan said. "We request a temporary restraining order preventing your husband and his parents from taking the children or contacting you except through attorneys. We submit this recording as evidence, and we go on the offensive before they have a chance to execute their plan." "Can we do all that on a Saturday?" "For emergencies, yes. I'll file everything electronically today. We'll have an emergency hearing probably Monday or Tuesday. You'll need to get the girls somewhere safe in the meantime, somewhere your husband doesn't know about." I thought about that. Jason knew where Rachel lived, though he'd only been there once or twice. He didn't know my parents' address because they'd moved last year to a retirement community a few hours away, and we'd never visited there with him. "My parents," I said. "I can take the girls to my parents." "Do that today and document everything from here on out. Every attempt he makes to contact you, every message, every call. Don't engage with him directly. Everything goes through me now." Susan filed the emergency paperwork that afternoon. Emergency custody petition, temporary restraining order, request for expedited hearing, all supported by the recording of Jason and his parents plotting to take my children. I drove to my parents' place with Emma and Lily, explaining to my confused daughters that we were going to visit Grandma and Grandpa for a little while. Emma asked where Daddy was, probably a dozen times. I kept my answers vague and cheerful, not wanting to scare her, but also not lying. My parents were shocked when I showed up unannounced with the girls and bags of clothes. I sat them down and explained everything, played them the recording. My mother cried. My father got very quiet in the way he does when he's furiously angry but trying to stay controlled. "You're staying here," my father said firmly, "as long as you need to. Those girls are safe here." My phone had been blowing up with calls and texts from Jason since Friday night. I hadn't answered any of them. The messages started concerned, then confused, then angry. Where are you? Why did you take the girls? My parents are worried. You're being crazy. Call me back now. You can't just take my children. By Sunday morning, the tone had changed. He knew something was wrong. I don't know what you think you heard. You're misunderstanding. We need to talk about this rationally. You're scaring the girls by running away like this. My lawyer says you're in violation of custody arrangements by keeping the girls from me. We didn't have custody arrangements. We were married. But he was already talking about lawyers, already making legal threats. They were moving forward with their plan even though I'd run. Susan advised me to document every message but not respond. She'd handle all communication. On Monday morning, she notified Jason's attorney, the one he'd apparently already hired in preparation for his custody fight, that emergency motions had been filed and a hearing was scheduled for Tuesday afternoon. I got a string of furious messages from Jason after that, accusing me of trying to steal his children, saying I'd regret this, threatening to call CPS himself immediately to report that I'd kidnapped the girls and was keeping them in unsafe conditions. I forwarded everything to Susan. Let him make those threats, Susan said. Every message like that supports our case that he was planning to abuse the system. He's showing his hand. The emergency hearing was Tuesday afternoon. I had to leave Emma and Lily with my parents and drive back to attend. I was terrified walking into that courthouse. Jason was there with his attorney, a polished man in an expensive suit. Patricia and Richard were there too, sitting behind Jason in the courtroom like this was their battle too. The judge was a woman in her 50s named Judge Morrison. She'd reviewed all the filed motions and evidence before the hearing. She started by addressing the attorneys, asking them to present their positions concisely given the emergency nature of the hearing. Jason's attorney went first. He painted me as unstable, claimed I'd fled with the children without explanation, suggested I was having some kind of mental health crisis. He said his client was a concerned father who just wanted to ensure his children's safety and that this emergency motion was an overreaction by a paranoid spouse. Then it was Susan's turn. She stood up calmly and said, "Your Honor, I'd like to submit evidence that will explain exactly why my client felt it necessary to protect her children immediately." She played the recording. In that courtroom, with Judge Morrison listening intently, with Jason's face going pale, with Patricia and Richard shifting uncomfortably, the entire conspiracy was laid bare. Patricia's voice discussing CPS reports and building a custody case, Richard talking out their financial advantages and legal strategy, Jason confirming what evidence he'd gathered against me, what photos and videos he had on his phone. The discussion of inheritance and proper upbringing and taking the girls because I wasn't good enough. The recording was 18 minutes long. Judge Morrison listened to the entire thing without interruption. When it finished, she looked at Jason with an expression of cold disgust. "Mr. Henderson, did you participate in the conversation on this recording?" Jason's attorney tried to object, but Judge Morrison cut him off. "I'm asking your client a direct question. Sir, is that your voice on this recording discussing plans to file false CPS reports and manufacture evidence against your wife?" Jason looked trapped. "Your Honor, I can explain. Is that you? Yes or no? But you have to understand the context." "The context," Judge Morrison said, her voice cutting, "appears to be that you, your mother, and your father conspired to abuse the Child Protective Services system and the courts to remove children from a fit parent because your family doesn't approve of her socioeconomic background. Is that an accurate summary?" "No, Your Honor, we have genuine concerns about the children's welfare. Concerns you were planning to fabricate evidence for? Concerns you were going to report to CPS using false information? Mr. Henderson, do you have any actual evidence of abuse, neglect, or unsafe conditions?" Jason's attorney stood up. "Your Honor, my client has documentation of concerning behaviors. I'd like to see that documentation, right now. What evidence do you have that these children are in danger?" Jason's attorney pulled out his phone, pulled up photos, presented them to the judge. I couldn't see them from where I sat, but I could imagine. Pictures of my house with toys on the floor, the girls watching TV, dishes in the sink, me with a glass of wine. Normal life framed as neglect. Judge Morrison looked through them silently. Then she looked up. This is your evidence. A lived-in home, children watching television, a mother having a glass of wine with dinner. Are you seriously presenting this as proof of unfitness? Your Honor, there are multiple instances documented over several months of normal parenting, of a house that looks like children live in it, of a mother who is tired sometimes, of completely typical family life. There is nothing in these photos that rises to any level of concern. She turned to Susan. Does your client have any history with CPS? Any reports or investigations? None whatsoever, Your Honor. Any criminal record, any substance abuse issues, any documented mental health problems that would affect her parenting? None, Your Honor. My client has a clean record and stable employment. She's been the primary caregiver for these children their entire lives with no issues until her husband's family decided she wasn't good enough for them. Judge Morrison looked at the papers in front of her, then at Jason, then at Patricia and Richard sitting behind him. I'm granting the emergency custody motion. Temporary full physical custody to the mother, pending further hearings. Mr. Henderson, you are granted supervised visitation only to be arranged through a court-approved facility. You and your parents are ordered to have no direct contact with the children or with Mrs. Henderson except through attorneys. Your Honor, that's extreme, Jason's attorney began. What's extreme is plotting to file false reports with a state agency to steal children from their mother, Judge Morrison said, her voice hard. What's extreme is manufacturing evidence and abusing the legal system because you don't think someone is good enough for your family. Judge Morrison looked directly at Patricia and Richard. I'm also ordering an investigation into potential criminal charges for conspiracy to file false reports. The recording will be forwarded to the appropriate authorities. Patricia's face went white. Richard grabbed her hand. Jason looked like he might be sick. We'll schedule a full custody hearing in 30 days. But I want to be very clear, Mr. Henderson. The recording I just listened to has severely damaged your position. You conspired to take children from a fit parent using false pretenses. That calls your own judgment and character into serious question. Your attorney might want to discuss with you the possibility of accepting extremely limited custody arrangements, because if we go to a full trial with this evidence, you may well end up with nothing. The hearing ended. Jason tried to approach me as I left the courtroom, but the bailiff stopped him, reminding him of the no-contact order. I heard Patricia crying as I walked out, Richard trying to calm her down. Their plan had backfired spectacularly. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt terrified, because I knew people like Patricia didn't give up just because a judge told them no. Over the next 30 days before the full custody hearing, my life became something I didn't recognize. I was living with my parents in their small retirement community home, sleeping on an air mattress in their office, while Emma and Lily shared the guest room. Both girls kept asking when we were going home, when they'd see Daddy, why everything had changed. I tried to explain in age-appropriate terms that Mommy and Daddy were having problems, that we needed to stay with Grandma and Grandpa for a while, that everything would be okay. But 5-year-old Emma was smart enough to know something was very wrong, and 3-year-old Lily fed off her sister's anxiety. Jason had his first supervised visitation 3 days after the emergency hearing. It took place at a family services center, a depressing building with fluorescent lights and worn furniture, where a social worker sat in the corner taking notes while Jason played with the girls for 2 hours. Susan advised me not to attend, so my mother took them and waited in the lobby. According to the social worker's report, which Susan received afterward, Jason had cried, told the girls he missed them, promised they'd all be together again soon. Emma had been clingy and confused, asking him why he couldn't just come home with them. Lily, being 3, had mostly just been happy to see her daddy and played with the toys in the visitation room. Jason had asked Emma questions about where they were staying, what their routine was like, whether Mommy seemed okay. The social worker had noted this as inappropriate questioning and redirected him. Jason's attorney filed motions trying to get the temporary custody order modified, arguing that supervised visitation was unnecessary, that I was being vindictive and using the children as weapons, that Jason's only crime was loving his children and wanting what was best for them. Susan fought every motion. The recording was damning, and Judge Morrison wasn't swayed by Jason's attempts to reframe his conspiracy as concerned parenting. But the legal battle was only part of what made those 30 days a waking nightmare. The other part was knowing that Patricia and Richard Henderson were still out there, still convinced my children belonged with them, still with resources I couldn't match. 1 week after the emergency hearing, I got a call from a CPS investigator. Someone had filed a report about my children. An anonymous caller had expressed concerns about the children being moved suddenly, about me keeping them from their father, about potential instability and inadequate care. The investigator needed to do a home visit. My blood ran cold. They'd done it anyway. Even after the judge's order, even knowing they were under investigation, someone had called CPS. The investigator said it was anonymous, but I knew exactly who was behind it, Patricia and Richard, or someone they'd convinced to make the call for them. Susan was furious when I told her. She contacted the investigator and explained the situation, provided copies of the court orders and the recording. The investigator agreed to note the context in her report, but said she still had to complete the investigation. It was her job. The home visit happened at my parents' house 2 days later. The investigator, a tired-looking woman in her 40s named Mrs. Chen, interviewed me extensively, asked about why we'd left, about the children's routine, about their health and schooling and daily care. She interviewed my parents. She spoke separately with Emma, asking gentle questions about whether she felt safe, whether anyone had hurt her, whether Mommy took good care of her. Then Mrs. Chen asked to see where the children slept, what they ate, how we spent our days. I showed her the girls' shared room, humble but clean, the kitchen where my mother cooked balanced meals, the small backyard where they played. Everything was fine, more than fine, but I felt violated having to prove my fitness as a parent because Jason's family was using this system as a weapon. Mrs. Chen's report, which came a week later, found no evidence of neglect or abuse. She noted that the living situation was temporary due to ongoing custody proceedings, but that the children appeared healthy, well cared for, and bonded with their mother. She also noted the unusual circumstances of the report coming immediately after court proceedings, where false reporting was discussed, and recommended no further action. But the damage was done. Now there was a CPS report with my name on it, even though it had been unfounded. It was exactly what they'd planned to do, and they'd done it despite everything. The investigation on file could be pointed to later, could be used to argue there had been concerns, even if they weren't substantiated. Susan filed a motion to hold Patricia and Richard in contempt for violating the spirit of the court order, which had forbidden them from contacting me or the children. Filing a CPS report was a form of contact, a form of harassment. The motion included the CPS documentation and argued it was clearly retaliation. Judge Morrison agreed. She held a hearing specifically to address the CPS report and the question of who had made it. Patricia and Richard's attorney argued they had no proof his clients were involved, but the timing was too convenient, coming just days after they'd been recorded planning exactly this. Judge Morrison expanded the restraining order to be more explicit. No direct or indirect contact, no third-party contact, no reports to authorities without legitimate evidence of immediate danger. If another unfounded report is filed, Judge Morrison said coldly, I will not only pursue contempt charges, but will recommend criminal harassment charges. Am I clear? Patricia and Richard weren't present for that hearing, but their attorney assured the judge they understood. I didn't feel reassured. People with money and determination and a belief that they're morally right don't stop just because a judge tells them to. They get creative. They find new ways. And Patricia Henderson was nothing if not determined. The full custody hearing was scheduled 4 weeks after the emergency hearing. In that time, Susan and I prepared extensively. We had the recording, obviously. We had Jason's messages showing his threats and his anger at being caught.
We had the CPS investigation file showing an unfounded report filed in suspicious timing. We had character witnesses, my employer who could attest to my reliability and stability, my parents, friends who'd known me for years, even Emma's kindergarten teacher who wrote a letter describing me as an engaged and caring parent. Jason's side had their own preparation. His attorney had lined up witnesses too. His parents who would testify about their concerns for the children's welfare, his business colleagues who would vouch for his character, even a child psychologist they'd hired who would testify that children benefit from having resources and opportunities that financial stability provides. They were going to argue that even if Jason had made mistakes in judgment, even if his parents had been overly involved, none of that changed the fact that he loved his daughters and could provide them with advantages I couldn't: private schools, travel, cultured upbringing. They'd try to make it about what was best for Emma and Lily, not about punishment for what Jason had done. Susan warned me that custody cases were unpredictable. Judge Morrison was on our side based on the emergency hearing, but a full trial with more evidence and testimony could shift things. Judges were supposed to rule based on the best interests of the child, and sometimes that calculation favored the parent with more resources, even if that parent had shown poor judgment. "We have a strong case," Susan told me, "but we need to be prepared for any outcome, including shared custody, even if it's heavily in your favor." The thought of sharing custody with Jason after what he'd tried to do made me sick. But Susan was right that we had to be realistic. Courts generally liked to keep both parents involved when possible, even when one parent had done terrible things. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the air mattress in my parents' office, listening to the house settle, thinking about what might happen tomorrow. Best case scenario, I got full physical custody, with Jason having limited supervised visitation. Worst case, we ended up with split custody, and Jason got my daughters into his parents' home regularly, where Patricia could continue her campaign to undermine me and position herself as the better parental figure. The hearing started at 9 a.m. The courtroom was the same one as the emergency hearing, Judge Morrison presiding. Jason was there with his attorney, and despite the restraining order prohibiting their presence near me, Patricia and Richard were in the courtroom as spectators. They couldn't approach me, couldn't speak to me, but they could watch. Patricia's expression was cold and composed. Richard looked grim. They were dressed impeccably as always, projecting wealth and respectability. Jason's attorney presented their case first. He called Jason to testify. Jason took the stand, and his attorney walked him through a carefully crafted narrative. Yes, he'd made mistakes. Yes, he'd allowed his parents' concerns to cloud his judgment. Yes, he'd participated in discussions he now deeply regretted, but none of that changed that he was a loving father who'd always put his daughters first. He'd been worried about their welfare, perhaps overly influenced by his parents, and made errors in how he addressed those worries. But he loved Emma and Lily with all his heart and just wanted to be a part of their lives. It was a convincing performance. Jason cried at several points, talked about missing bedtime stories and breakfast with the girls, described Emma's laugh and Lily's hugs, painted himself as a father suffering from being separated from his children over a misunderstanding that had spiraled out of control. Then Susan cross-examined him. She pulled out transcripts of the recording and walked through specific sections, asked Jason to confirm his own words, made him read aloud his statement about documenting evidence against me, about meeting with lawyers, about the inheritance promise. "Mr. Henderson, on this recording, you stated that you had been gathering photos and videos of your wife for months, correct?" "Yes, but I was genuinely concerned." "Photos of what exactly? What evidence of abuse or neglect did you capture?" Jason faltered. "Just concerning behaviors, the house being messy, her seeming tired and overwhelmed, the girls watching TV. Watching TV is neglect? It can be if it's excessive. Was it excessive? How many hours were your daughters watching television per day?" I'm not sure exactly. "Sometimes a few hours on weekends?" "A few hours on weekends. Is that unusual for young children? I suppose not. And the messy house. Did you document any safety hazards? Exposed wires, dangerous chemicals within reach, anything that could harm your daughters? No, not specifically, but... So, you documented toys on the floor? Dishes in the sink? Normal signs of a family living in a home. It was more than that. It was a pattern of her not being able to cope. Susan pulled out the photos Jason had taken, the ones his attorney had presented to Judge Morrison at the emergency hearing. She had them displayed on a screen for the courtroom. One by one, she showed them. A photo of our living room with toys scattered on the floor, a photo of the kitchen with dishes in the sink, a photo of the girls eating chicken nuggets for dinner, a photo of me on the couch with a glass of wine, looking tired while the girls played nearby. This is your evidence of unfitness? A mother who looks tired, children eating a meal you don't consider nutritious enough, a house that looks lived in? There were patterns over time. Patterns of normal parenting. Susan cut him off. Mr. Henderson, did you ever witness your wife hit either of your daughters? No. Did you ever witness her verbally abuse them? No. Did you ever see her intoxicated around them? No. Did you ever have legitimate reason to believe they were in danger in her care? Jason was quiet for a long moment. Then, no, but my parents thought... Your parents thought your wife wasn't good enough for your family because she comes from a working-class background. Isn't that what your mother said on the recording? My mother was concerned about the girls' opportunities. Because their mother doesn't come from money? Because she doesn't fit your family's standards? That's what this is about, isn't it? Jason didn't answer. Susan continued, and you were promised an adjusted inheritance if you helped your parents get custody. Is that correct? My parents wanted to ensure the girls were provided for. By taking them from their mother and giving you money? Answer the question, Mr. Henderson. Were you promised financial benefits for participating in this plan? Yes. So you conspired to take your daughters from their fit mother using false evidence and planned false reports for money. Is that an accurate summary? No, it wasn't about the money. I thought it was what was best for them. You thought separating young children from the mother they've been primarily bonded with their entire lives was best for them? Based on what?
Jason had no good answer. Susan let the question hang before returning to her seat. Jason's attorney did damage control on redirect, having Jason explain his thought process, his confusion, his misguided trust in his parents' judgment. But the harm was done. The recording, combined with Jason's inability to articulate any legitimate concerns, made it clear this had been about class prejudice and money, not child welfare. Next, Jason's attorney called Patricia to testify. This was risky, given the recording, but clearly they'd decided she needed to present her side. Patricia took the stand looking dignified and composed, like she was attending a charity board meeting. Patricia's testimony was carefully coached. She spoke about her love for her granddaughters, her desire to see them have every advantage in life, her concerns, perhaps overstated, about their living conditions. She admitted the recording made her look bad, but insisted her intentions had been pure. She'd only wanted what was best for Emma and Lily. She'd been willing to provide them with opportunities their mother couldn't, the best schools, travel, cultural experiences, connections that would help them succeed in life. These girls are Hendersons, Patricia said earnestly. They deserve the upbringing that comes with that name, not because their mother is a bad person, she's not, but because they should have every possible advantage, and we can provide that. It was a skillful reframe, making it about opportunity rather than prejudice, about giving the children more rather than taking them from me. But Susan wasn't going to let her off easily. Mrs. Henderson, on the recording, you discussed filing false CPS reports. Can you explain what you meant by that? We were discussing how to express our concerns through proper channels. The proper channel for false concerns? You stated specifically that you would report witnessing concerning behavior during the visit when in fact you'd witnessed normal toddler behavior. You plan to misrepresent a 3-year-old's tantrum as evidence of neglect. Isn't that filing a false report? I wouldn't characterize it that way. How would you characterize it? We were planning to report our genuine concerns as mandated reporters. Are you a mandated reporter, Mrs. Henderson? Well, no, but any citizen can report. Any citizen can report genuine concerns, yes, but you discussed framing normal behavior as concerning. You discussed strategic timing of multiple reports to build a case. You discussed having a lawyer ready before CPS was even called. That's not genuine concern. That's abuse of the system. Patricia's composure cracked slightly. I want what's best for my granddaughters. What's best for them according to whom? According to a judge who would evaluate evidence, or according to you because you don't think their mother is good enough? Their mother is a lovely person, but she can't provide what we can. She can't provide money, but can she provide love, stability, consistency, appropriate care? Has she done so for 5 years with Emma and 3 years with Lily? Yes, but she's not wealthy. That's the issue, isn't it? You said on the recording that the girls deserve to be raised like Hendersons. What does that mean? Patricia struggled to answer in a way that wouldn't sound classist. It means having opportunities. It means you think your wealth makes you better parents than their actual mother. It means you think money is more important than the bonds between a mother and her children. It means you were willing to traumatize 2 young girls by ripping them from their primary caregiver because you don't approve of where she comes from. That's not true. Then what is true? Why were you planning to take these children from their mother if not because you think you're better than her? Patricia had no good answer. She fell back on vague statements about opportunities and advantages and wanting the best for the girls. But Susan had made her point. This was about class and prejudice, not child welfare. The hearing continued for most of the day. Character witnesses on both sides, the child psychologist Jason's side had hired, testified about the benefits of resources and stability. Susan countered with research about the importance of primary caregiver bonds and the trauma of unnecessary separations. My employer testified about my reliability and work ethic. My parents testified about what they'd witnessed of my parenting over the years. Emma's kindergarten teacher provided written testimony that was particularly powerful. She described me as an engaged parent who attended every conference and school event, who worked with Emma on her reading, who clearly prioritized her daughter despite having a full-time job. She noted that Emma was well-adjusted, age-appropriately developed, happy, and secure. There were no red flags that would suggest neglect or instability at home. Finally, Judge Morrison called a recess and said she'd issue her ruling the following morning. She needed time to review all the testimony and evidence before making such an important decision. We were all ordered back to court at 10 a.m. I spent that night at my parents' house, unable to eat or sleep. My entire future, my daughter's futures, were in Judge Morrison's hands. I trusted that she'd seen through Jason's family's manipulation, but custody decisions were complex, and she had to consider many factors. Maybe she'd think Emma and Lily deserved their father in their lives more than he deserved to be punished. Maybe she'd think Patricia and Richard's resources did matter, despite their terrible behavior. Maybe the fact that I was living on my parents' air mattress instead of in a home of my own would count against me. The next morning, we all assembled back in the courtroom. Judge Morrison entered and we stood. She looked tired, like she'd spent the night reviewing everything, which she probably had. This is one of the more troubling cases I've handled. Not because there are questions about abuse or neglect, there clearly aren't any, but because what we have here is a conspiracy to use the legal system and child protective services as weapons to take children from a fit parent for reasons that have nothing to do with the children's welfare and everything to do with classism and control.
She looked at Jason, then at Patricia and Richard in the spectator section. The Henderson family has resources. They have money, education, connections. Those things can benefit children, certainly, but they do not trump a child's need for their primary caregiver, for stability, for the mother who has been their constant presence since birth. And they especially do not justify the coordinated campaign I saw evidence of in this case. Judge Morrison laid out her findings. The recording demonstrated clear conspiracy to commit fraud against the CPS system and the courts. Jason's documented evidence showed no actual concerns, just normal family life he'd intentionally mischaracterized. The CPS report filed after the emergency hearing, despite denials, was clearly retaliation and harassment. The entire situation showed deeply flawed judgment by all the adult members of the Henderson family. As to custody, Judge Morrison said, I'm awarding full physical and legal custody to the mother. Mr. Henderson will have supervised visitation only 2 hours per week at the Family Services Center until such time as he completes a co-parenting course and demonstrates genuine understanding of appropriate boundaries. His parents, Patricia and Richard Henderson, are prohibited from any contact with the minor children. If Mr. Henderson wishes to petition for modification of this arrangement in the future, he may do so, but not for at least 6 months. Jason's face crumpled. Patricia gasped audibly. Richard put his arm around her. Furthermore, Judge Morrison continued, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney for investigation of potential criminal charges related to conspiracy to file false reports. Mrs. Henderson, you may wish to consider a civil suit for the emotional distress and expenses caused by this situation. That's outside my jurisdiction, but I want you to know that option exists. She looked at me directly. I'm sorry you and your daughters were put through this. No parent should have to defend themselves against manufactured evidence and coordinated attacks on their fitness. I hope the girls will be able to maintain a healthy relationship with their father eventually, if he can demonstrate genuine remorse and change. But that will be up to you and time. The ruling was exactly what Susan had hoped for, but more than I dared to believe. Full custody, supervised visitation only, restraining order against Patricia and Richard, and potential criminal charges pending. We left the courthouse with Susan feeling relief and terror in equal measure. Relief that I'd won, that Emma and Lily were legally protected now. Terror because I knew the Hendersons wouldn't accept this. Patricia and Richard weren't the type to just give up because a judge ruled against them. And Jason, for all his faults, did love his daughters. He'd been manipulated by his parents, yes, but he'd also made his own choices. Would he accept such limited access? Or would this just be the beginning of a longer battle? The answer came faster than I expected. That evening, I got a call from Susan. Jason's attorney had filed a notice of appeal. They were going to fight the custody ruling in appellate court, arguing that Judge Morrison had been biased against Jason based on his parents' behavior, that she'd punished him too harshly for what amounted to poor judgment, that the children deserved more access to their father. Can they do that? I asked Susan. Can they overturn the ruling? They can try. Appeals are difficult, especially in custody cases where judges have broad discretion. But it means this isn't over. It means more legal fees, more time, more uncertainty. I felt like I couldn't breathe. When did this end? When could I stop fighting? Over the next weeks, other consequences unfolded. The district attorney's office did investigate the conspiracy case. They ultimately decided not to file criminal charges, determining it would be difficult to prove beyond reasonable doubt that specific false reports would have been filed since the plan had been intercepted. But they did send official warning letters to Jason, Patricia, and Richard about abuse of the CPS system. Jason had his first supervised visitation under the new custody order. According to the social worker's report, he'd cried again, told Emma and Lily he was fighting to see them more, that he loved them and missed them. Emma had asked why he couldn't just come home. The social worker had noted this was confusing for the children and recommended Jason stop discussing legal matters with them. I tried to keep life as normal as possible for the girls, but living with my parents long term wasn't sustainable. The retirement community had rules about how long guests could stay, and Emma and Lily needed stability, a real home, their own space. But I was terrified to go back to the house I'd shared with Jason. Terrified he'd show up despite the restraining orders. Terrified Patricia and Richard would find a way to cause more trouble. Susan suggested I consider moving, starting fresh somewhere Jason's family wouldn't know to look, somewhere I could rebuild without constantly looking over my shoulder. The idea made sense, but felt impossible. I had a job here, friends, my parents. How could I just uproot everything? But how could I not? How could I raise Emma and Lily in constant fear that the Hendersons would find some new way to attack? Patricia had money for endless lawyers. Richard had connections throughout the city. They'd already shown they were willing to abuse the legal system. What would they try next?
1 month after Judge Morrison's custody ruling, I made the decision. I was going to move. Out of state. Somewhere far enough away that the Hendersons couldn't easily show up. Somewhere I could start over without their shadow hanging over everything. I gave notice at my job, found a position in another state, a lateral move with similar pay but in a city where no one knew the Henderson name. Found a small rental house in a decent school district, enrolled Emma in kindergarten there, and found a preschool for Lily. Packed up the few belongings I'd taken from my old house. I didn't tell Jason where I was moving. I told the court as required, but filed the new address under seal, so it wouldn't be public record. Susan argued successfully that given the circumstances, my location needed protection from the paternal grandparents who'd already demonstrated willingness to harass me. Jason's attorney objected, claiming this was parental alienation, that I was trying to cut Jason out of his daughter's lives. But Judge Morrison noted that supervised visitation could continue via video calls, that Jason could travel to the new state for in-person supervised visits if he chose, and that my need for safety from his parents' interference outweighed his preference for geography. 2 months after that terrible weekend at the Hendersons' house, I moved with Emma and Lily to a new state. We left in the middle of the night, drove 12 hours to our new home. I didn't tell anyone, except my parents, Susan, and the court, exactly when we were leaving. I was paranoid that somehow the Hendersons would try to stop us, would intercept us, would find some last-minute legal maneuver to prevent me from leaving. But we made it. We arrived at our new little rental house exhausted and overwhelmed. Emma cried, saying she missed her old room, her old school, her friends. Lily was confused about why we kept moving, why everything kept changing. I held them both and told them this was our fresh start, our safe place, where we could just be us, without anyone trying to take us apart. It's been 6 months now since we moved. We're settling into our new life. Emma started first grade here and has made friends. Lily loves her preschool. I'm doing well at my new job. We're building something here. Something that's just ours. Jason has video visitation once a week. He talks to the girls for an hour every Saturday morning. Sometimes he asks them questions about where they live, what they do, trying to piece together our location. The girls don't know our address or the name of their school because I've been intentionally vague. Emma asks sometimes when she can see Daddy in person. I tell her maybe someday, when things are safer. The appeal is still pending. Jason's attorney continues to argue that the custody arrangement is too restrictive. My attorney continues to argue that given what Jason was willing to do, supervised visitation is generous. We're waiting for the appellate court to rule. It could be months still. I live with constant anxiety that somehow they'll find us,
that Patricia will hire investigators to track us down, that they'll show up at Emma's school or follow us from the grocery store. I've installed security cameras at the house. I've told both schools that only I am authorized to pick up the girls, that if anyone else tries, they should call police immediately. I've given them photos of Jason, Patricia, and Richard with instructions that these people are not allowed contact. Maybe I'm paranoid. Maybe the Hendersons have moved on, accepted their loss, gone back to their comfortable lives. But I don't think so. People like Patricia don't accept not getting what they want. People with money and connections and absolute certainty in their rightness don't just give up. I'm building a life in fear, teaching my daughters to be cautious about strangers, to never give out information about where we live, to come to me immediately if anyone they don't know approaches them. Emma is 5 and having to learn about safety in ways that break my heart. Lily is 3 and doesn't fully understand but knows that something is wrong, that mommy is scared. This is what it costs to protect your children from people who think money makes them better than you. This is what it means to stand up to people with resources and connections and the absolute conviction that they know better than you how your own children should be raised. I won in court. I have full custody. My daughters are safe with me. But I'm still running, still hiding, still afraid. And I don't know when that will end. Maybe when Emma and Lily are adults and can make their own choices about relationships with their father's family. Maybe never. Maybe this is just my life now. I saved my children from being taken. But I lost my home, my job, my community, my sense of safety. I gained full custody but lost the ability to live without fear. Was it worth it? Yes. 1,000 times yes. Because Emma and Lily are with me. Because they weren't raised by people who thought their worth was measured in money and connections. Because they're being raised by someone who loves them for who they are, not who they could be shaped into. But it's still a loss. It's still a theft. The Hendersons stole my sense of security. They stole my ability to trust that the system would protect us without fight. They stole years of peace I'll never get back. That's my story. The night I overheard my in-laws planning to steal my children and realized my husband was helping them. The moment I grabbed my girls and ran, the legal battle that followed, the move across the country to escape, the life I'm building now in the shadow of constant vigilance. I hope someday I'll feel safe again. Someday Emma and Lily will grow up enough to understand what happened and why we live the way we do. Someday maybe the fear will fade. But right now, today, I'm just surviving, protecting my daughters, building our life one careful day at a time, and watching over my shoulder, always watching, waiting for the next attack I know could come from people who never learned that children aren't possessions to be won.